Section 4B, Military Departments for 4.4, Defending the Nation. Since the nation's birth, our military has had the constitutional duty to ensure national survival, defend lives and property, and promote vital interests at home and abroad. Jointly, senior military leaders underwrite the strategy of defending the homeland and assuring allies, while dissuading, deterring, and defeating enemies. The military departments consist of the Army, Navy, including the Marine Corps, and, in wartime, the Coast Guard, and the USAF, including the Space Force, as shown in Figure 4.1. 4.5. General Military Functions. The Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff establish the general and specific functions, roles, and missions of each branch of the U.S. Armed Forces in the Key West Agreement of 1948. The latest revision of the Key West Agreement in 1958 states three general functions of the U.S. Armed Forces. 1. Support and defend the U.S. Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. 2. Ensure, by timely and effective military action, the security of the United States, its possessions, and areas vital to its interests. 3. And uphold and advance the national policies and interests of the United States. Each service shall observe the general principles and fulfill the specific functions as established in the Key West Agreement, and make use of the personnel, equipment, and facilities of the other services in all cases where economy and effectiveness will be increased. Functions of the United States Army. The U.S. Army serves as the land-based branch of the U.S. Armed Forces. The mission of the Army is to fight and win our nation's wars by providing prompt, sustained land dominance across the full range of military operations and the spectrum of conflict in support of combatant commanders. The Army is responsible for the preparation of land forces necessary for the effective prosecution of war, and for the expansion of peacetime components of the Army to meet the needs of war. The Army is also responsible for developing weapons, tactics, technique, organization, and equipment of Army combat and service elements, and coordinating with the Navy and the USAF in all aspects of joint concern, including those which pertain to amphibious and airborne operations. The specific functions of the Army are to organize, train, and equip land forces for 1. Operations on land, including joint operations. 2. The seizure or defense of land areas, including airborne and joint amphibious operations. And 3. The occupation of land areas. Functions of the United States Navy. The mission of the U.S. Navy is to maintain, train, and equip combat-ready naval forces capable of winning wars, deterring aggression, and maintaining freedom of the seas. The Navy includes naval combat and service forces, naval aviation, and the Marine Corps. It is organized, trained, and equipped primarily for prompt and sustained combat at sea. The Navy is responsible for the preparation of naval forces necessary for the effective prosecution of war, and for the expansion of the peacetime components of the Navy to meet the needs of war. U.S. Navy is the largest, most capable Navy in the world, with the highest combined battle fleet tonnage and the world's largest aircraft carrier fleet. The Navy will develop weapons, tactics, technique, organization, and equipment of naval combat and service elements, coordinating with the Army and the USAF in all aspects of joint concern, including those which pertain to amphibious operations. The specific functions of the Navy are to organize, train, and equip naval forces for 1. Operations at sea, including joint operations. 2. The control of vital sea areas, the protection of vital sea lanes, and the suppression of enemy sea commerce. 3. The support of occupation forces as required. 4. The seizure of minor enemy shore positions capable of reduction by such landing forces as may be comprised within the fleet organization. 5. Naval reconnaissance, anti-submarine warfare, and protection of shipping. Functions of the United States Marine Corps. The Marine Corps' specific functions are 1. To provide Marine forces with supporting components for service in the seizure or defense of advanced naval bases and for the conduct of limited land operations in connection therewith. 2. To develop, in coordination with the Army and the USAF, those phases of amphibious operations which pertain to the tactics, technique, and equipment employed by landing forces. 3. To provide detachments and organizations for service on armed vessels of the Navy. 4. To provide security detachments for protection of naval property at naval stations and bases. And 5. To provide, as directed by proper authority, such missions and detachments for service in foreign countries as may be required to support the national policies and interests of the United States. The Marine Corps will provide, as directed by proper authority, such missions and detachments for service in foreign countries as may be required to support the national policies and interests of the United States and will assist the Army and the USAF in the accomplishment of their missions. Functions of the United States Coast Guard. The U.S. Coast Guard is a military service and a branch of the U.S. Armed Forces at all times. It is a service in the Department of Homeland Security except when operating as part of the Navy on declaration of war or when the U.S. President directs. Major functions of the Coast Guard are to 1. Enforce or assist in the enforcement of all applicable federal laws on, under, and over the high seas and waters subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. 2. Engage in maritime air surveillance or interdiction to enforce or assist in the enforcement of the laws of the United States. 3. Administer laws and promulgate and enforce regulations for the promotion of safety of life and property on and under the high seas and waters, subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, covering all matters not specifically delegated by law to some other executive department. 4. Develop, establish, maintain, and operate with due regard to the requirements of national defense, aids to maritime navigation, icebreaking facilities, and rescue facilities for the promotion of safety on, under, and over the high seas and waters subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. 5. Pursuant to international agreements, develop, establish, maintain, and operate icebreaking facilities on, under, and over waters other than the high seas and waters subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. 6. Engage in oceanographic research of the high seas and in waters subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. And 7. Maintain a state of readiness to function as a specialized service in the Navy in time of war, including the fulfillment of Maritime Defense Zone Command responsibilities. Functions of the USAF. The USAF includes all military aviation forces, both combat and service, not otherwise specifically assigned, and is organized, trained, and equipped primarily for prompt and sustained air offensive and defensive operations. The USAF is responsible for the preparation necessary for the effective prosecution of war except as otherwise assigned, and for the expansion of the peacetime components of the USAF to meet the needs of war. The USAF will provide the means for coordination of air defense among all services and will assist the Army and Navy in accomplishment of their missions, including the provision of common services and supplies as determined by proper authority. The specific functions of the USAF are to organize, train, and equip air forces for 1. Air operations including joint operations, 2. Gaining and maintaining general air supremacy, 3. Establishing local air superiority where and as required, 4. The strategic force of the United States and strategic air reconnaissance, 5. Airlift and support for airborne operations, 6. Air support to land forces and naval forces, including support of occupation forces, 7. Air transport for the U.S. Armed Forces, except as provided by the Navy, and 8. To develop weapons, tactics, technique, organization and equipment of USAF combat and service elements, coordinating with the Army and Navy on all aspects of joint concern, including those which pertain to amphibious and airborne operations. Functions of the United States Space Force. The Department of the Air Force is composed of air, space, and cyberspace forces, both combat and support, not otherwise assigned. The USAF and Space Force are the nation's principal air and space forces, and are responsible for the preparation of forces necessary for the effective prosecution of war. The Department of the Air Force shall organize, train, equip, and provide air, space, and cyberspace forces for the conduct of prompt and sustained combat operations, military engagement, and security cooperation in defense of the nation, and to support the other military services and joint forces. The USAF and Space Force will provide the nation with global vigilance, global reach, and global power in the form of in-place, forward-based, and expeditionary forces possessing the capacity to deter aggression and violence by state, non-state, and individual actors to prevent conflict, and should deterrence fail, prosecute the full range of military operations in support of U.S. national interests. The Space Force, within the Department of the Air Force, shall develop concepts, doctrine, tactics, techniques, and procedures and organize, train, equip, and provide forces to perform the following specific functions. 1. Provide freedom of operation for the United States in, from, and to space. 2. Provide prompt and sustained space operations. 3. Protect the interests of the United States in space. 4. Deter aggression in, from, and to space. 5. Conduct space operations.